Hey folks, welcome to the Autofocus podcast. My name is Scott.
And I'm Dan.
And this is episode number 9. First of all, I just want to say thank you everyone for listening and supporting Dan and I. It means a lot to us. We're having a lot of fun. We're learning a lot. And hopefully you guys are learning something as well. The other thing is we'd really appreciate it if you guys would subscribe and start liking the episodes, or if there's any comment, if you have any comments or anything like that you want to give us some criticism, whether it be about the topic or video production or whatever, we're all for it. We want to let you know that we are on YouTube and Facebook for video platforms, and for audio we are on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor FM, Breaker, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, and now we are on Apple Podcast finally.
We're everywhere.
We're everywhere. And for tonight's topic, I'll let Dan introduce kind of what it is we're going to talk about, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so tonight we're going to be talking about lenses, different lenses, vintage lenses, Canon, Nikon, Sony. Everyone kind of has different mounts, all the lenses are different.
Yeah.
Third-party glass, too, is very good now. So, yeah, we're going to be talking about lenses today.
Yeah, different focal lengths, like what if you're using a wide angle and maybe your practicality with that particular lens, and long lenses, zoom lenses, prime, the whole 9 yards. It's a fun topic.
And what they're used for.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
why use a zoom? Why use a prime?
Yeah.
What's a fast lens, a slow lens, stuff like that.
So it's a good episode. It'll probably be a little bit longer than everything else, maybe closer to 45 minutes or an hour. We'll see. There's just a lot to cover during for this topic, but I think we should start with the basics. I mean, most people use an iPhone to take photography, so traditionally you have like a medium wide angle lens on an iPhone or just typical cell phone, and nowadays there's two lenses. So a lot of times they're either doing a telephoto lens, which is what's considered like something from like 85 millimeters out to like 200 telephoto, and then the newest iPhone now has a super wide angle on it. Which is cool. I mean, it's these phones are becoming more and more photography driven
as 100, because it's pretty crazy how far you can zoom in and how wide you can get on a phone.
It's insane.
As small as that lens is. Yeah,
I know.
It's unbelievable.
People probably laugh when I pull out a zoom lens, right? Now it's this long thing, and then they got their phone and they can zoom in just as far as I can.
Zoom right in.
There's obviously a quality difference there, but yeah, for sure. So I think we should start out with phones, pretty straightforward. Everybody kind of see it, but most of the time people buy an SLR or a mirrorless camera or whatever, and you get the kit lens with it. At least that's how I've started both times for me.
I think that's almost how everyone starts out.
So when we're talking, we don't say professional cameras, but more photography and videography, they start with what's called the kit lens, and it's traditionally a zoom lens on a crop sensor is 18 millimeters to 55 millimeters, which is the equivalent on a full frame to about 24 millimeters to about 70 millimeters. You had kit lens on your Canon, right? That was the first.
Yeah, so I had the kit lens. I think I even upgraded to this. I forget what it was, the 70 to like 300 or something.
Right.
But it was Canon's like intermediate.
Yeah,
lens.
they're kind of middle of the road, entry level. You say it's not good, but like.
Well, you're right. It was good, but then when you buy good glass and you take
see
a photo,
the difference.
Then you're just like, wow, yeah, absolutely.
You see the difference. I think it's funny because people get so hung up on the specs for all this stuff, and like, oh, I've got to have. At the end of the day, it totally does make a difference to have like a nice piece of glass, a nice lens, but you don't need it. Like, it's still, I've taken some amazing photos with my kit lenses, the basic lenses that you buy on used market for $100. They get the job done. But things that you kind of get along with the kit lenses, you don't get necessarily the fastest lens. If you want to explain a little bit about like what a fast lens is in terms of like, yeah.
Yeah, so when you're talking, like, everyone says fast lens, and that's your aperture. So a not fast lens would be like a 5.6 or, somewhere around there.
Yeah, I would say even like an f4 isn't that fast.
F4, yeah. An f2.8, an f1.8, and f1.2, those are pretty fast lenses. And that's just, you're letting more light in so you're opening your lens up so you can let more light in.
Right.
That's why it's considered a faster lens, because you're you can be
It's
at a shallower depth of field.
yeah,
Or
a
however,
faster shutter speed is it's kind of confusing because
it's almost
it is
backwards
backwards. We're
when
talking
you're
about
learning it.
we're
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about how fast a lens is, but then we're not talking about shutter speed, which is what captures the motion. So it is a little backwards. I've never really
Right. Well,
go.
yeah. When I was learning it, it was very confusing because the bigger it gets, like the wider it gets, the
The
lower the
smaller the
number
number, right?
gets.
So
Right. So it's very
yeah,
it's
the
weird.
fastest lens I have is an f1.8, and it means that the aperture on the lens, the little hole that's in there, if you look in a lens, you can see there's like a diaphragm and a bunch of blades and stuff. And the
Yeah.
lens in an f1.8, it's pretty large. And actually, I don't know if I can show you. Can I show everybody with this? Yeah. So if you look
Oh,
here,
you can see it too.
can you
Yeah.
look in
Yep.
here? I don't know. Let's get my lens to
Yep.
focus here, and I can close this. Those blades, that's the aperture. That's what we're talking about. So that right there, I think this is an f22, no, f16. So that's f16. This is a 50 milliliter lens. But when I back this all the way out, that's f1.8, and that lets all that lets all the light in. The cool thing about that is you get that professional look that a lot of people go for. You get that blurred background. You're able to shoot in darker environments, and it creates what they call bokeh, which is that blurred, nice, muted background. It allows your subject to really pop and stand off of that. So everybody wants a fast lens, but they're expensive traditionally,
Super expensive. Yeah. Yeah. They're very pricey.
right? So typically,
But that.
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say, yeah, that's the good thing too with these third party lenses or companies is because you can buy they're making such quality glass now, and it's
There's
double the 10 times cheaper
Oh,
than
it's
buying
crazy.
the
So
original
we'll
glass.
jump ahead a little bit just to talk because we're talking about third party lenses. I shoot third party lenses. I have one Sony Prime lens, but the lens I'm shooting on now is a 28 to 75 f2.8, which is a pretty fast zoom lens. And it was literally probably 30% the price of the Sony glass. Like, not 30, but
Yeah.
probably 40%. Because the Sony version of this is like $2,800. This was about
Yeah.
$1,000. So it's about about a
Now,
third.
what is that is that Tamron?
Tamron. So for the Sony
Tamron.
FE mount, this is a Tamron. The next lens I'll buy will be the 70-180. We'll get into that, which is their long zoom range.
Are you gonna stay Tamron?
I think so. The cool thing about it is I
Yeah.
now have a 20 millimeter f2.8 from Tamron and this one, which is 2875. And then if I get that, they're all 67 millimeter filter thread. So if I want to put an ND filter
Yeah.
or a polarizer or anything like that on there, I can do that, and it doesn't cost me a ton. And I love the form factor. So the Sony lenses are a lot bigger because they're kind of odd sizes. Like people traditionally, 16 to 24 or 16 to 35 would be like your wide zoom traditionally, then 24 to 70, and then 70 to 200. Tamron's kind of gone with some weird focal lengths, but what it's allowed them to do is kind of get the size down and the price, which is allowed to make it so that it's more affordable to the consumer. But we'll get into that a little bit more. Let's get back to kit lenses in general. So everybody starts with a kit lens. It's great. You don't get the best glass. You don't get the best coatings on the lenses, which allow for weather resistance and stuff like that.
Right. They're usually plastic. It's not very well built, but that's considered you're buying.
For the price, they're great
coming with
value.
the camera.
Exactly.
Right.
So, and I would say typically the next thing people buy are we've talked about this before in other episodes is what they call a nifty 50. Which is affordable prime 50 millimeter lens, and I have one for the Sony, and they're traditionally f2.8. It's what that old vintage lens that I showed you was, and we'll get into that further down the episode.
Oh, yours is 2.8?
Nope, mine's an I'm sorry, f1.8. This is an f.
Oh,
this
1.8.
is an f.
Yeah.
This is
yeah.
an f2, or f1.8. Yeah, this is f1.8. But yeah, a lot of them. The old vintage lenses are kind of they have odd aperture.
Yeah.
But yeah, so prime lenses are great. The cool thing is you get on typically a lesser budget of a zoom, you're getting better quality and better optics because those lenses don't have to move within the lenses, and the price is great. I mean, my nifty 50 I think was $100, maybe $125 used.
And that's yeah. Mine was 125. I bought two of them. I'm about to buy another one because mine's broken or it's almost
Right.
broken. it's just so easy to kind of just like throw it
Yeah,
around and
because
not really care. But it's an amazing.
yeah, they're
It's an
great.
amazing
They're great
lens.
for 50
Yeah.
millimeter focal length. Now we'll get a little bit into like what you use them for. 50 mil is great for portrait. It's great for street photography. It's great for inside if you've got a decent sized room. Um, you know,
Right. It's almost that mid-range lens that kind of covers every. You can do portraits. You can do landscapes. You can do. It's almost that like street photography. You
yeah,
can
you can
just
do
throw
it
it on and
all.
go everywhere. Yeah.
The one downside you get from like a cheaper lens, at least on my body, and I don't know how it is on yours. Is the autofocus isn't quite as crisp as like my higher end lenses. It's not as fast, but it gets the job done. And I wouldn't know any better if I hadn't had
Right.
a
If that's
nicer
all you had.
lens, right? So,
Yep.
but the 50 mil, it's every photographer and videographer's just got to have a 50 mil.
Yeah, that's actually just to bring up the autofocus stuff too. That's why I have to buy another one because my autofocus is messed
Really?
up. But yeah, on the so this is the 70 to 200. I know I'm jumping the gun,
Yep.
but 70 to 200, and when you buy a more expensive lens, it usually the autofocus system is a little bit better. So this is the ultrasonic
Right.
autofocus or whatever. So it's quieter
Right.
than my nifty 50. I can hear when I'm shooting video. I can hear my 50
Going back
focusing.
Exactly. And
Exactly.
actually
yeah,
the first
with the 7200 K.
right, the first episode I shot on my 20 mil for the podcast, and part of the reason I was a little bit out of focus is because I didn't want to use autofocus on that lens because you could hear it in the microphone and it hunts a little bit. It was $350. It wasn't an expensive lens. It's weather sealed. It's great for photography, but it's not great for video. So sometimes buying a lens, it's you have a purpose.
Depends
for
what you're
it.
gonna shoot.
Yeah, so
100%.
yeah. Originally, I was going to go to, or we still are, but things got canceled because of coronavirus, so we ended up not going to Ireland. But I bought that lens for Ireland so that I could shoot wider landscapes. And interiors. There's a couple stuff that we want to do in castles and stuff, and it's nice to have a good 20 mil lens for like interior and somewhat fast f2.8, so somewhat decent in low light. But I actually don't even have a higher zoom lens, so I'll let you talk a little bit about 70 to 200 and like different qualities, but then also what you use it for.
Yeah. So, I mean, my 70 to 200, I would say, at first I actually had the 70 to 200 f4, and then I upgraded to the 2.8, which that one stop of light or whatever, you get so much more.
You think it makes a big difference?
2.8. 100%.
So
100%.
because and this is a genuine question. This isn't like I'm not just playing this up for the podcast. So I can buy the F4 version of the Sony F4 version for about the same price that I can buy the Tamron F2.8 version for.
F2.8.
And it's like, well, okay, so
I would go 2.8. You
Right.
will upgrade eventually.
yeah, see,
I'd
that's
go
the thing.
2.8.
And at the end of the day, the Tamron will get me there. So
Yeah. So no, it was huge.
So you went, Sony F4 to F2.8, and just for that extra stop of light. So in low light situations, you're good. But what do you use it for? Like, what's your main, like?
So, I mean, this lens, I honestly had it on my camera for everything. I mainly got it in the beginning for wildlife because I couldn't afford a crazy long lens. So I got this for wildlife and kind of sports. I was shooting surfing and my friends and stuff, skateboarding. And then I also got it for portraits. I already had a wide lens, so I already had like a 24 to 70. So I was like, well, I need something from 70 to 200.
Right.
That's the next.
That's the next progression.
Right. I'm not going to buy another wide, So I bought the 7200, and it literally you can shoot everything with it. I love it.
So
yeah, I have this on my camera all the time.
yeah, the cool thing about it, pretty much I would say anything from like 70 millimeters up to anything higher. I mean, we're talking about 200, but they make lenses that are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,000 millimeters.
Yeah.
But is you get what's called compression in the image, and
the higher you go,
the more compression you get.
Yeah.
So what happens when you shoot we'll start with the landscape, just because that's my book, right? So when you shoot wide, you're getting like layers, and you can kind of see the depth in an image. You can kind of see, if you've got a foreground image and then something in the middle and something, you can kind of see that in the image. But when you shoot something on a zoom lens, what it does is it takes it and it makes everything almost look like it's two-dimensional, like it's on a piece of paper. So So your eye, let's just say you're looking at if the hill was right here, you're seeing the hill, but then whatever was behind it, it could be hundreds and hundreds of yards behind it, is still right up against it. You don't see any distance between them when you shoot at some high 200 mil or 300 millimeter. So it's really cool. It also is really flattering for faces. So
Yeah.
you do a
Yep.
lot or a decent amount of portraits and stuff like that.
Right. So that's another reason why this lens is so great, because when you have a wide lens and if you're shooting faces with wide lenses, it's going to distort whatever it's shooting. So your face isn't going to look natural or normal. A 70-200 is just an all around lens that you can it's amazing for portraits.
Yeah, you're making me want one pretty bad.
Yeah, no, I would say the 50 millimeter in 85, a 70-200, or a 100 millimeter macro are like
Yeah.
great for
And
portraits.
I struggle with that a little bit because I'd love to get an 85 right now, because like they're relatively
Yeah.
affordable. I can get a decent one for about 550, even an f1.4 like Rokinon makes one. But I have a 75 f2.8. I go, is an extra 10 millimeters a
Exactly.
difference? Like I'd rather save up and get that
Right,
70 to 180 or 70 to 200.
Definitely.
But yeah, an 85 f1.8 is cool though. I mean, that's a portrait lens hands down, because it's not like you get a
Yeah.
ton of reach out of it, but you're still getting some compression out of it. But it's more flattering for faces and stuff like that. Now, you've shot have you shot all of the podcasts on your 70 to 200?
No, no. Right now I'm using my 24 to 70.
You are.
Yeah, but I shot a couple episodes with my 70-200.
Okay. So
Yeah, I switch it up
what
randomly.
what focal length are you at right now for shooting? Are you at?
I think I'm actually at 24.
So that's about what I'm shooting. I'm shooting 28.
yeah.
So just to give somebody
Yeah.
an idea of like what we're shooting at, and how it can make your face look. Now again, it's not, my face doesn't look distorted. Dan talked about like it looking, the closer you
Right.
get to the camera, the more distortion it will look. But
So like just like we talked about in the first or second episode, we were talking about the fisheye.
right,
And you were like, "Oh, you get so much perspective."
Right.
The wider you go. So if you're shooting a fisheye, obviously everything's going to be distorted
Right.
and bubbled out. You shooting 10 millimeter, 16, it's going to go in and in and in. 24 is wide, but it's not
not too
crazy.
bad.
It's not like you're going to
Yeah.
Yeah.
for sure.
But also you'll be able to tell when you put your photos next, like if you shot 24,
Right.
and then you shot next to a 50, and then you shot the same picture,
we can-
then you'd be able to tell.
I don't know if we'll have the ability to do that. Maybe we can implement something.
Like add some.
Yeah, we can
photos
add
in
some
there,
photos.
yeah.
I don't think we have any. I don't have any that are like I shot the same thing at a different
Well,
focal
we
length.
could just take photos of someone's our faces.
Yeah, we
at
can
the
try
same-
something just to put something in there so that people understand the difference and what a difference it really can make.
Yeah.
But it's probably what I researched the most, because what makes a good photographer great is knowing what lens and what focal length to make something look super flattering. So recently we were doing car shows, and I've been shooting a lot of cars, and I had very little experience other than like, taking pictures of my own cars and stuff. And like, at what point does like a car start to look funny? At wide angles, at longer focal lengths? How do you shoot interiors? So that's something that, like, knowing what focal length to use at the right moment is what makes you a really good photographer.
Yeah, and back to the 70-200, I would say, in the beginning when I started out, I was using it for wildlife, but it's not a wildlife lens.
It's not long enough, right?
You're gonna want more reach. Yeah, you're gonna want it to be a little bit longer. So
Yeah.
I ended up buying a Sigma 150 to 500. I think was my
Right.
next big
Which is
lens,
super
so,
cool.
Yeah.
The other thing we talk about getting when you get into more expensive. So obviously you're getting more, clear glass in there, and all that light and stuff has to go through that glass. But you're also probably getting some sort of image stabilization. So
Right. Those lenses, right? So you can buy a lens without image stable. It would be the same lens. You can buy it without image stabilization, but you add that in, it's going to be
drastically
a lot
more
more
money.
expensive.
So my Tamrons don't
Yeah.
have any image stabilization in them at all.
Yeah, but does your Sony have embodied?
Exactly. So
Yes, yes.
what that is, and we'll break it down a little bit. So, stabilization in a lens allows for the lens. Actually, I don't actually know 100% how it works in the lens, but it allows for there to be some So like if you're rocking a little bit,
It's almost like a
yeah,
gimbal.
it'll like even out the picture in the camera
Yeah.
itself. So my camera's got what's called IBIS, in body image stabilization, and it actually, the sensor will move. So if I'm hand holding a shot, and let's just say I'm at a shutter speed of like 1/30th of a second, right? And let's say I've got my
I can't believe you're shooting at 130th
I
of a
can.
second. That's slow.
I know, but I can shoot that slow if I'm inside, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
it calls for
Wow.
that. So 1/30th of a second, and then I've got max aperture, right? F1.8 or f2.8, and I don't want to boost my ISO anymore. My camera will actually try to adjust everything and make sure that I'm not getting a lot of motion blur. I can get a full stop
Yeah.
out of my in-body image stabilization, whereas if it didn't have it. So it helps a lot. It keeps the cost of my lenses down, for sure,
Yeah.
because I don't have to worry about, getting some eye or some stabilization in my lenses.
Now, would it be worth you buying? What would happen if you bought a image stabilized lens with
So
your
I could get
camera that
two
has it?
full stops probably out of stabilization.
So it would just be
It would
better
just be better.
with
And
with
so,
working.
and
Yeah.
that's why
Yeah.
like that Sony F4 lens I was talking about, that 7200, it has it. So it would give me the ability, even though it's F4, I can shoot something at the same low light as an F2.8, right? Because it's got that stabilization in it. So it's kind of
Oh, that's true.
convoluted, right? So it's like, do I
Yeah.
get something that's a metal construction and it's Sony native, right? So it's ideally will work better. For years, third-party lenses were junk, like Sigma and
Right.
Tamron and
Yes.
Tokanon and
Yeah.
Rokinon and all these random companies. And Sigma made lenses, and they were junk. They were plasticky. The glass wasn't good. They were just a cheaper alternative to the real deal. But now,
Yeah.
I would say in the past 5 years, maybe, third-party lenses,
Sigma
dude,
stepped up their game
their
huge.
art series lenses, all metal construction. I held
Yeah.
one the other day. They're phenomenal. They
Yeah.
If
Yep.
I bought a prime lens, if I was going and I was going to buy like a 135 or something, that's the lens I would get, the Sigma over the Sony.
Yeah. And now when I'm looking at lenses, I don't even think, oh, I'm going to get a Canon lens. I sit there and I'm like, oh, what is Sigma?
What do they
What's
offer?
Sigma's new lens or
Right.
what do they have? Yeah. So I'm looking around and back in the day, you're
You wouldn't do
100%
that.
right. You would never do that.
Nope.
Yeah. It would only be what your brand was that you'd be getting that
Yeah,
glass.
it's huge, and it makes it more obtainable for somebody like me that I don't generate a ton of revenue from my hobby. So, justifying spending $3,000 on a lens, crazy, right? But
Ugh.
but it makes it so that I can still get that quality that I want as a hobbyist, and then it's something that, like, I love high production quality, but not have to spend $3,000. I still have to spend it. It's still a
Yeah.
lot of money. I still have to spend $1,000, but
Right. The other good thing about lenses too is just like you were saying, with the price, they're expensive, but you also get a return on your lens. So if you have a lens, you can almost sell it for either what you bought it for or a little bit under because they hold their value.
Yeah.
If you don't want to dump all your money into a body because in 2-3 years you're gonna get a new one. With a lens, you're gonna have that for a long, long time.
yeah. So people who aren't into photography and video or getting into it, traditionally cameras don't change their mounts that often. So the mount is, or the flange on a camera is how the lens attaches to the camera. So once a camera company commits to a particular amount, that's pretty much how they go for a long time.
A long time.
I mean,
yeah.
so Sony, they've had the E mount for about 8 years, and that's young. I mean, that's like not like they're committed to that for a long time. I mean, how long have you had? What's the Canon mount called?
So Canon has the EF mounts, but they actually just with their RF lenses now, they just changed it, which is it's weird that we're talking
I
about
know.
it, but Canon just changed it with their mirrorless because it's a new camera,
Right.
so they've
But
never
that's
made a
new
mirrorless
technology,
camera, so
right? So that's
Yes.
why technology. But
Yeah.
what did they include when you buy your camera?
So they offer an adapter so you can hook up your EF lenses to your
So if
mirrorless
you
or the newer
so if
body
you
camera.
invested in EF glass, like let's say you have $10,000 worth of EF glass, you don't have to throw
Exactly.
it away, but you can still
You're not
upgrade your
losing
body.
out.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. So you're right. So like I bought a camera that was a little bit older to start getting into the Sony ecosystem, so that in 2 or 3 years or whenever the time comes, if I feel like I need to upgrade, I now have all the glass for it, and I can just go get that new technology, which is the body, not the glass, because there's not much going
Right.
on. I mean, autofocus has changed a lot within lenses, but at the end of the day, older autofocus motors and stuff still work just as well. It's not a deal breaker.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, for most things, well, not most things, but you're doing landscape. It's
Sure.
not like you have all the time in the world to sit there and get your
Exactly.
focus.
Even
So
with
it's not a big
even
deal.
with my kids, it's like, people
Right.
get so hung up on buying the most recent technology, but at the end of the day, they probably don't take advantage of 50% of it.
Oh,
My
100%.
camera when I
Yeah.
bought it was
Yeah.
like the technology was 5 years old, but for me, for what I do, it literally is perfect. Like there's at no point do I ever feel like I don't have what I need, what tools I need to be creative and create something.
Yeah.
The only my two complaints with my camera are battery life is terrible, and now I just bought a battery grip, and two is I don't have a fully articulating LCD screen.
Screen.
Other than
Yeah.
that, my camera is perfect, and those are small things.
Yeah.
Like there are workarounds for both of those. One of them I've already fixed.
Well, you fixed it with the battery grip, right? You fixed it, so
And
yeah.
the other one, for example, I'm tethering video onto my camera in this instance, so like I don't even need the swivel screen. So a lot of times
Mm-hmm.
you don't need that technology. It's definitely worth investing in glass before investing in a body, 100%. And
Yeah, I
and this,
agree.
I guess this is a good time for us to get into vintage lenses, which I know a little bit more about than Dan, only because I love. Again, we talked about it. I think episode 2 or 3. Just like something super old being married with new technology. But this lens right here, it is from the 70s or mid 70s. It's a 135, which blows my mind because if you can see, like, look at the size of this thing. It's small.
Yeah.
A
So
modern
small.
day 135 millimeter lens would be, I mean, probably the size. You got your 70 mil. Can you hold up your 70 mil?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Just a prime.
Just the prime
Just a prime
version would
lens?
be that size. I
Right.
mean, the size of that's the length of like Dan's, I mean, full hand, right? So, and this
Yeah.
thing's that's about half the length of my hand. So,
Yeah.
it's cool. It's a little bit more compact. The downside is there's no autofocus because back in the day, most of the time there was just manual focus. But you're getting, the cool thing about this lens is I think it's like 50 or $70. It's an f3.5, 135 mil. So I can hold up the, you can see right there, it's a pretty fast lens. It's a decent glass. And it's super cost effective. So it's kind of neat. Mirrorless cameras came out, and so originally these lenses were put on a 35 millimeter lens, and the
Camera,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
camera. Yep, 35 millimeter camera.
Yeah.
And the film that they were being projected onto was pretty much right behind this lens. Like it was right here. All the light had to come in and it would go right onto it. But as technology changed, we added these mirrors to the cameras, and the distance between the sensor and the camera changed. So that distance really critical. The distance between all the glass that's in here is really critical. So these lenses, as much as we say lenses were a good investment, started to become obsolete as digital came out. I don't know when the first digital camera came out. I would say it's got to be early 90s for like SLR type of product. But as mirrorless came out in the past 5 years, these lenses became more and more popular because the flange distance behind a mirrorless camera, the sensor is directly behind that flange. That flange is what we're talking about, that mount that you put your lens onto. So what I bought was an adapter, which I do have right here, which mimics the distance of the original vintage lens that it was shot on the 35 millimeter camera. So this is what's called a M42 mount. It was originally on like Pentax. So I screw this on.
Oh, wow, it screws
on.
on. Wow.
It's a screw-on mount, and then this side has my Sony mount on it. So then I screwed on, and now I can shoot with this. Now, again, the downside is this is a fixed focal length, and it also doesn't have aperture control in the camera. So again, I have to manually pick. I don't know if you can see it with it on the camera. Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
My aperture, which typically aperture stays relatively stagnant, but then I have to pick my focal length. I mean my focus length.
Now, yeah. So now I know you said that you like marrying the old with the new. Is there another, like, do you like the look of
Dude,
these lenses on the cameras? Like,
It,
what else
I
is
will
it?
say it looks a little funny. It looks a little funny with the battery grip on because my camera just dwarfs the lens. But when I don't have the battery grip on, I feel like it complements it pretty well. But what I do love about it
Yeah.
is the how you're kind of on sensor overload because you're controlling every little aspect, right? So I've got to pick my aperture. I decide, okay, I'm shooting. I've got it on a tripod. I'm zoomed down to a house or whatever it is. I want to make sure the entire thing's in focus. I'm going to click down, right? Click, click, click
Yeah.
down to a particular aperture, and then it's got the I don't know if you guys can see that. It's got the distance in feet and meters of where I'm focusing to, which most lenses do have, but it's cool that it's on the lens. Like, it's not digital, right? So I can say, okay, I'm at 25 feet, so I set it to that, and then boom, it's spot on. It's not going to change.
Yeah.
So
What's funny, my
no, you're good.
my fisheye is Rokinon. I have a fisheye Rokinon, and that's all manual.
Right.
But I almost find it easier and faster to change my aperture real quick, just right on the lens,
Yeah.
then go into the camera and dial it in.
The only time I don't shoot with vintage is when I'm shooting a subject like that's moving. Like, my kids are impossible to shoot with vintage. I could take 100 photos and like 3 of them might be in focus because it's too fast. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about with these vintage lenses is with mirrorless cameras, you get what's called focus peaking, which wasn't something that was on a consumer grade. Like, I would imagine your C100 has focus peaking because that was a video thing first, wasn't it?
It's all video. Yeah. That's for, the main reason is because it's for video. So my C100 Mark II has it. My 7D didn't have it, but it was the Magic Lantern that was able to give it some video features to do.
So what it does is it tells us as the photographers what is in focus. So it's not so important when you're shooting in an automatic lens because you can kind of quickly pick your focus point or manually pick it quickly because you can tell on the screen. But with vintage lenses, you can't. You just don't know. Like, there's so much variables. So what the focus peaking does is, at least on my camera, I have it set up so that it's red and it outlines whatever's in focus. So if I had this set up on me, it would perfectly outline my face in like this red kind of line, like almost like pencil
so it picks
drawn.
up the contrast.
And it would let me know that I'm perfectly in sharp. Maybe I'll shoot a one of the episodes on it if I can get a decent aperture. That would be kind of cool to shoot one of these on the vintage lens. I'd have to back the camera up a little bit, but so it makes it a little bit easier. And that's one of the reasons I was drawn to a mirrorless camera, is being able to marry that technology. I mean, the next vintage lens that I want to get is a like a 200 or 300 prime. Like, I feel like that'd be a cool focal length to have as a vintage lens because you kind of know what you're shooting typically at that point. So it'd be cool to have. They're expensive. I mean, most vintage lenses are anywhere from 50 to 150, 200 bucks. Whereas, it's not expensive, but the high zoom ones can get up to $500 to $1,000. But it's cool. I love the old technology. I'm also looking for an old 35 millimeter camera that I could just put like on the shelf for decoration.
That'd be
just
cool.
cool. I'd like it to have the same mount. So I'd like to find a Pentax one that those lenses would work on. Not that I'd ever shoot 35 millimeter film, but I just think it'd be cool to have like a set of lenses for that camera.
Yeah. So even to bring it back to when we were talking about focus peaking, a lot of video, I mean, movies and things they don't use autofocus.
My video stopped. You'll have to cut that out for a little bit. And put
Oh,
it back.
did it? That's all good. For focus peaking for video or movies and things, they shoot manual.
Right.
They have what's called like a focus puller, so someone will be back there pulling focus. So having focus peaking to let you know if you're in focus or not, because autofocus might hunt and then you ruin the shot. So some guy sitting back there and fine tuning the focus is just so much.
When Dan says focus pulling, he's talking about somebody physically like electronically controlling the focus on pro level cameras and cinema.
There's a motor
cameras.
On the lens, right?
And he literally so let's just say it's a moving shot and the camera's moving or the subject's moving. That person literally their only job is to make sure that person or whatever the director says to be in focus is in focus. It's incredible and it's cool. It's really hard to do. Dan's like a solo videographer, so for him to control, like if he's on a gimbal, focus, movement, and the subject, it's a lot. There's a lot going on, and we'll get get into directing and producing a little bit further episodes. But Yeah, lenses play a big part into that, and they play a big part into how you view a particular thing, right? Again, we talked about it for portraits, wide angle versus a high zoom, but same with landscapes. If I take a 200 millimeter shot of a house, right, you're only going to see maybe the house, maybe the garden out front and the walkway. But if I take it at 24 millimeters from far away, from the same distance, you're gonna see its surroundings, right? You're gonna see the trees, the background, the sky, the road, everything. We didn't really touch on this. We talked about prime lenses. People say, and you've said this, I think, in another episode, is you like to zoom with your feet. Like you like to take, instead of like going and scrolling out to or rolling out to 200 millimeters, well, screw it. I'll say it's 70 millimeters. And I'll try to get closer to my subject. It'll look a little bit different, but at the end of the day, you can still kind of capture the same shot.
Yeah, no, I was explaining it. I would rather have zoom. I would rather have a zoom lens. I like the convenience of being able to just kind of change it whatever I would. But do you like primes better?
I don't know. I think it depends on what I'm shooting. So for landscape, 100% I like primes. Because again, it's a slower process, so like it makes me think about it. It actually makes my experience better. I have shot stuff with my 28 to 70 5, but I prefer the 20 mil or a 50 mil because it's like I already kind of know what my focal length's going to be, so I know the distance I need to be away from something. So I just kind of go and set it up. Whereas sometimes when you go and you sit down and then you're like zooming back and forth, I don't want to get that in there. It's kind of I think it ruins the experience for me. But if I was doing street photography where I'm walking around, right, and taking pictures of signs and people and stuff, definitely a zoom lens.
Yeah. I know a lot of people say, prime glass. It's sharper. It's crisp because there's not as many layers of glass. But to me, I'm like, it doesn't
matter.
Nowadays,
it doesn't matter.
Glass is so good, right? You're not really going to tell the difference.
Unless you're what they call pixel peeper, where you're like, zooming in to see like, again, these lenses, these vintage lenses, their glass compared to a modern lens, they're terrible. Like dust is in here. Like I can physically see there's a hair in this one. Like it's not perfect. It's not perfect.
Have you ever? Do you ever even think about cleaning it? I took my 50 millimeter apart and cleaned
no.
all that.
To me, it's part of like the charm. Like if it was really distracting in the image, I'd probably use like the marker tool or whatever it's called and delete it. But at the end of the day, I think it's what gives it the charm of the image, and
that's kind of cool. Yeah.
That's why I'm drawn to that, the vintage. And I only have a couple, but I use them, and they're light, so I can kind of always have them. In our last episode, we talked about gear and a couple episodes, and it's like we take so much shit with us. The other thing is that lens was $60. So if I toss it on the passenger seat of my car, or I always keep it in the glove compartment, it's getting banged around. It's not going to get beat up. It's metal. It's glass. There's no plastic in it. And then I can always grab it when I'm going to use it. So I like vintage lenses. I think everybody should have one. I mean, I know you don't have one. You should get one. You should get a focal length that you probably don't want to spend the money on, but you're like, I think it'd be cool to have one. Like that, I guess I challenge you to go find one. Find one, get them out, and do it up.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm just, it doesn't interest me to get a vintage lens.
Not at all.
I want, not at all. I mean, I want the sharp. I mean, I mainly shoot wildlife, so I need my.
Yeah, but
autofocus.
how about when you do video stuff, like
speed.
when you're shooting manual, like.
For sure.
Like, the problem is
That's
have.
True. Yeah, but
you've been investing in glass and in the same brand for years, so like you pretty much have every.
So
focal
I almost have like
covered.
the holy trinity of exactly. Yeah. So. But yeah, I mean,
the Holy Trinity.
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't.
The Holy Trinity. 3 lenses, right? So what is it? 16, 35, 70, 24, 70,
24,
70,
70 and then
the
70,
Holy Trinity.
200.
Does it all have to be, I guess, are you a purist? Does it all have to be Canon?
I would. I mean, if you're gonna do it, it might as well be Canon, or it could all be Sigma,
or Tamron,
it should all be one brand.
And that's what I'm going for.
Yeah.
They do. Tamron does make a. I think it's a 17 to 28 or something like that. So I'll get that at some point because the autofocus motor is better than the 20 millimeter that we were talking about earlier. So I would be able to do video and stuff like that. But
and that's right. Your lenses also will vary on what you're doing.
For sure.
So if you're doing photos or you're doing video, it's there's some things you have to look at. definitely. But do you put any filters or anything like even clear filters on your lenses
So
to protect them at
when
all?
I shot Nikon, I was like, oh, I'm spending all this money. Like I need to make sure I'm
You didn't want
projecting
to
it.
damage it.
So I would put UV filters on or whatever, but I'd spend 10
Yeah.
bucks on them. The problem is my
Yeah.
image is being shot through that cheap piece of glass or plastic or whatever it is. And to me, I was like, okay, that's a waste. Like that's, so I don't use a UV filter.
Yeah.
I will use a polarizer or ND filter depending on the situation. On our photo battle podcast, I think that's episode 3, maybe. I don't know. Episode 3, episode 2. You asked me about one of the images if I used a polarizer and I didn't. Different. We'll get it.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
we'll
right.
get into
Yeah.
filters at some point, but polarizer allows for it's basically like sunglasses for your lens, polarized sunglasses for your lens. So it allows for you to cut through water and reduces any reflection off of even like leaves or anything that's like super high contrast. So I have a polarizer. I have an ND filter for 67 millimeter. But I don't honestly use it that often. I mean, the polarizer I'll use when I'm shooting water. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Or like wet. Anytime it's wet out, a polarizer is kind of cool. How about you?
Yeah. With me, I used to have the clear filters on my end of my lenses just in case I banged it on
Yep.
something. But again, I would buy an expensive lens. I'd put a shitty filter on it, and it's like, what's the point of that? Because I'm shooting
Yeah,
through.
you bought a
expensive
$3,000
glass,
piece of like lens,
you know,
and you're putting a $10
yeah,
piece of glass on
$50
it. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but no, and with ND filters, I have it on my camera. It's built in. So that, I mean, that
Yeah,
is
that's
huge.
crazy.
It's
Like
unbelievable.
that's one thing that it actually. So it's you have full ND filter on that thing. So how many stops can you
Yeah.
run? Do you know?
I think I have 4 on my C100
Now is that
Mark II.
upgradable? And do you have to clean those? Like how does that work?
So it's just it's a rotating lens that goes over the sensor. So on the C100 Mark II, it's manual. So there's literally glass just going right in front of
Cool.
the sensor. The FS7 or
From
FS5
Sony.
is electronic, right? From Sony, their cinema cameras. It's electronic, which is good in some points because it's variable, so you can really dial
Right.
it in, which is amazing. But I love just like being able to
Again,
click and
that tactile
it's not gonna break.
feeling too is
Yeah.
there's something about that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many people out there that have like, I mean, that's why they like a manual car or vintage car because they like that like manual feeling. And there's some things that's super important too, and that's part of the reason why I like vintage. But yeah, you being able to click those ND filters, there's something satisfying about that.
It's huge. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think we covered a lot of good things on lenses.
And there's more. I mean, we'll do an episode, I'm sure, that's like
definitely.
maybe we'll focus on wide and medium and they dial into like I'll have to do a ton of research, but on like they talk about elements in a lens and like how many glass
Yeah.
and groups and the whole 9 yards. I'm not so technical about it, but
Yeah. So if you're going to give advice to somebody out there listening to the podcast, what's one thing you would tell them about lenses that you like about it? If they're going to buy something.
I would say definitely go buy a Nifty 50. Like if you're going to buy a camera, go buy a Nifty 50 and force yourself to use it. Using a prime lens will make you a better photographer. I honestly feel that way.
Definitely. Definitely.
It makes you think about your shots more as much as like you have to have the zooms because you don't want to not be equipped to take the shot. I think having one focal length, one fixed focal length makes you appreciate using a zoom, but makes your composition better for sure. That's the advice. How about you? What advice would you give?
Yeah. So for me, I would say it depends where you're at in photography or videography if you're a beginner or advanced. But I would say spend the money on some good glass if you're really going to get into it. The Nifty 50 is great, but if you're really thinking about getting into it, spend your money on glass and not really the body.
Yeah, because here's the thing. At the end of the day, I mean, I'm kind of contradicting exactly what I just said, but you have a Nifty 50, so you can't like say otherwise. But I'd say that like if budget was limitless, I'd say at some point, like again, I would buy a 135 mil. I know I have my vintage one, but I'd buy a 135 if I was like a car photographer because that's a great focal length for that. So, make sure, I guess, find out what photographer what kind of photography or videography you're going to do, and maybe do some research and find out what you think the best focal length for that would be, and buy that prime lens if you don't want to go the
Yeah.
cheap route.
I don't. Yeah, I don't think I'll ever upgrade to a 51.2 or anything because my 51.8 is so
Yeah.
good. I don't think I'll upgrade. Even if I have the chance to upgrade, I don't think
I
I
don't
would.
see the return on an investment from a f1.8 to f1.2 or f1.4.
Right.
So like I talked
Yeah.
about that 85 mil from getting an 85. They make an f1.8. The difference between an f1.8 and a 1.4 are so small, you wouldn't notice it. And these mirrorless cameras
Yeah.
are so good that I can shoot in ISO so high
Right,
that
just bump the
you
ISO
can't
up a
tell.
little bit, yeah.
Sure, your depth of field is shorter, but
Yeah.
there's even when you shoot portraits, f1.8 is almost too shallow. Like
You got to be tack on
and
that
then
eye.
the thing
Yeah,
is, your
already.
nose is out of focus. So like, I
Yeah.
prefer portraits done at f2.8. I think you can get your full face almost fully in focus and your head. So like
Yeah.
at that point, you're just getting a little bit more sharpness out of that lens, and I don't honestly think it matters. I don't.
Yeah, I think the Nifty 50 is the best lens they came out with ever.
Yeah, for sure. So cool. I think that's a great episode. Again, if anybody has any questions or comments about this topic, I'd love for anyone to please comment. So it creates some talk. So maybe it's something we can bring up in our later episodes. I want to say thank you everyone for listening. This is the Autofocus podcast. My name is Scott,
And I'm Dan.
and everyone have a great night.
See ya.
Later.